Okay, so Far Cry 6. They just today released a bunch of new info about it, and I'll say right now, I'm excited for the game. Like whatever else I say here, I think it does look really cool, and I'm gonna play it just because, well, I love all the Far Cry games, and they're just a lot of fun, and getting more of that is always good to me. But there's just one thing about the news we've gotten today that just made me roll my eyes and kind of irked me, and that was there was this news article that has gone around a little bit where it said that Ubisoft, the people making it, talked to like actual guerrilla fighters because the story in this it takes place on an island called Yara, which is based off of Cuba, and you're just fighting a revolution against a evil dictator. Like, okay, great. And they talk to actual guerrilla fighters, but they're going out of their way to quote not make it political. Like, it's a little vague what that means, but it did make me roll my eyes a little because like that feels like a bit of an opportunity wasted. And I'm not saying like, oh, talk about how awesome Castro is, or talk about how awesome Batista is, or anything like that. Like not even specifically real world politics or anything, but Far Cry seems to go out of its way a lot of the time to dumb down its storyline and its settings. And that is to its detriment, I think. Like, for example, in Far Cry 4, if you've played it, you know that there's basically three different paths you can choose in the game for Kyrat, and all of them are kind of shitty in their own way. Like, there really isn't a right or a wrong answer there. You just kind of have to pick, okay, which dictator is going to be ruling this country, and which is the least bad, basically. And you know, you can actually argue a little bit about which is the worst and which is the best and all that sort of thing. And so even though Far Cry 4 story-wise is not that great, I don't think, like it has a fun villain and all, but the story really doesn't, well, there kind of isn't one, but I don't know, that's a separate discussion. But having that little extra bit of complexity there makes it better. You know, it is a boon to that game, and I'm glad that that was there. Otherwise, it would have been much more forgettable than it really is. But then you have stuff like Far Cry 5, where they go so far out of their way to avoid offending anybody that, like, the setting and characters and the storyline, well, if I wanted to be charitable, I would say it simplifies them. But honestly, it does it to the point where it doesn't make much sense, and the whole thing is much weaker for that. Like the cult, the Project Eden's Gate. What do they believe? Well, Father Joseph Seed is their leader. Okay, yes, but what do they believe? The world's going to end, and beyond that, there's nothing. You know, it's just this crazy cult has taken over. Let's go fight them. And, you know, if you just want to tell a super simplified story like that, that's fine. Like, it worked out okay in Far Cry New Dawn, you know, and I liked that game. The villains there were just like, hey, we're bandits, we're going to take over, we're going to kill you if you resist, and obviously you resist. But in Far Cry 5, it was a huge, huge misstep to do that because it made everything more boring. Like, it was still fun to play, obviously. I still really like that game. That's good. I'm just a sucker for the formula. You know, I know it's very similar every time, but you know, I still love it. But you know, Far Cry 5, I think it would have been a lot better had they actually taken a little bit of time to go into the beliefs of the Project Eden's Gate. And I guess if they really wanted to, they could have made it so that it made a little more sense, and the player could maybe go, oh yeah, I kind of see where they're coming from. Or they could just make them, you know, crazy villains, but at least they would be crazy villains with a little bit of definition. Because, as it stands, Father Joseph is a pretty boring character, even if the actor playing him is giving his all. And he does clearly have a lot of charisma, so you can kind of see why people would follow him, but you don't know anything about really what him or his people stand for, so it could have been a lot better. And I'm afraid that Far Cry 6 is going to fall into that same trap, where okay, yeah, this is a fun game to play and all, and there's not a lot of twists or turns or anything to the story. It's just kind of like, oh, hey, let's go out and kill some bad guys until eventually we have a final confrontation and then we win. And, like, sure, I guess that could all be fine. But, man, if they actually put in some moral conundrums there, or put in something where people could actually, like, argue about it and say, like, oh, yeah, the main character, I believe their name is Donnie, the main character could actually, they shouldn't have done that. That was the wrong thing to do. And other people will say, well, that was actually the right thing to do. Like, if they had the actual ability to have that sort of discussion there, and where you can actually argue 2 points of something and not sound like a crazy person on either side, then that just makes the whole thing a million times better, you know? Video games with moral conundrums are a relatively new phenomenon, but they're so great when they're done right, at least. Like, the Mass Effect trilogy was recently just remastered, and those games have a ton of moral conundrums in them. You know, there's a bunch of points where there really isn't a right answer, but you just have to pick the best one and go with it. And the Dragon Age games are also pretty good about that. And as I mentioned before, Far Cry 4 it didn't have very many of those, but, you know, it's the same idea. And Far Cry 6, even if it doesn't allow, like, player choice in that regard, it would just be so great if they could do something like that. It's just a huge missed opportunity if they're going to go so far out of their way to avoid offending the capital G gamers, who are definitely going to get offended anyways, because those people just look for reasons to be offended. You know, they're already bitching about how the main character is a woman in this one, even though she kind of isn't. Like, you can choose your gender, but the woman is the default one. Like, you know, they're already getting butthurt about that, so you're never gonna please these people, you know? That's kind of an issue with just corporate produced anything, you know, movies, video games, whatever, is that they're always going to try and appeal to the lowest common denominator to avoid offending any demographics or anything. And so sometimes that does make things blander, I guess, would be a way of putting it. But I don't know. Anyways, Far Cry 6 still looks pretty cool. I'm really excited that they got Giancarlo Esposito in it. Like, that man can do no wrong. Like, I know most of his performances are kind of the same thing every time, but it's still so awesome. I haven't gotten tired of it yet. And, you know, the Far Cry formula of having a charismatic but evil dictator that you have to take down is also a lot of fun, which I still love that. The outpost system is great. It really lets you feel like you are taking back this area from the bad guys. So I just still haven't gotten tired of all that. And I could be wrong about a lot of this. You know, the game could come out months from now and be a bit different than I anticipated. Like, that interview that Ubisoft gave could be kind of misleading, but I don't think it will be. Ubisoft is not a great company. But that's a whole separate discussion. All the sexual harassment and everything, that's a whole separate discussion. I don't know. Anyways, Far Cry 6 looks cool. Bye.